Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to our study of the Wishfulfilling Jewel, Kyabje Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche's commentary and instruction on the practice of Guru Yoga. We've presently covered the sections on the actual practice itself. And what we're going to look at now are more instructions on how we want to integrate this. And it's very often said that without integration in our ordinary life, then we won't make much progress on the path. So integration of the practice of the Guru Yoga is an essential part of the practice. So there's never really a time where we're not practicing, in the sense that we're not meeting situations with meditation. So in that sense, you might think, oh my God, then there's never a break. But the thing is, it's actually, practice is the break. I think there was a Chögyam Trungpa who once was commenting on, I think it was Life magazine, that had a picture of the Dalai Lama. And the Dalai Lama was drinking a Coca-Cola. This was in the 1960s. And it said something like, the Dalai Lama taking a break. And Trungpa Rinpoche's comment was, from what? That's the whole point about the Dalai Lama. That's the whole point about the sage. That's the whole point about yoga, is that the practice of yoga is the break. The practice of what we're doing is the break. We're normally not giving ourselves a break. So every aspect of practicing is a departure from the grind that wears us down. So, so we don't want to lapse into ordinary confusion. We want to sustain this freshness, this openness, this condition of blessing that is the nature of the practice, and particularly then the practice of Guru Yoga here, which is immensely profound in that we're integrating something that is so living and true. It's the presence of the teacher and the discovery of our own inseparability from the teacher. So, kindly generate the awareness of the suffering there is in the world and the affliction that all sentient beings suffer from due to this confused condition. Nobody's done anything wrong, but because of confusion, then there's a deluded assumption about the nature of reality that leads to suffering. And it's this that we're remedying with the practice of Dharma. So Dharma is not just about our liberation, it's about understanding the nature of suffering universally and wishing to apply then what we're doing here, the study of the practice itself, in order to address this situation for all sentient beings. In terms of our looking at the masters of the lineage, last time we looked at Chetsen Sengye Wangchuk, and Chetsen Sengye Wangchuk was a holder of the Vimala-mitra's lineage, and from Vimala-mitra then, from Padmasambhava and Vimala-mitra, there are two lineages. One is an oral lineage, and one is a lineage of treasure teaching. And we're going to be looking at how these two teachings were they met in Longchen Rabjam. In the Nyingma tradition, Longchenpa is sometimes referred to as the second Samantabhadra. He's seen as the one that brought together all the lineages of the Dzogchen Pith instructions and made them very applicable and accessible. So we have the lineage that we looked at previously that came then from Vimala-mitra and down to Nyangwen Tsinsen Sangpo, Dharma Lhundel and Chetsun. Then we have, from Chetsun onwards, down until the 14th century, we then have a lineage of masters that then continue holding this teaching, achieving liberation, and passing these instructions on. So Longchenpa received all of these in their entirety from his master, Rigzen Kumaradza. He also received the teachings of the Nyingtik teachings, the hard essence teachings of Padmasambhava, from a great master called Gyaltse Lekdrup Tsel. And Gyaltse Lekdrup, he received these from somebody called Pema Letter Tsel, who was a treasure revealer. And Pema Letter Tsel, he had received these teachings, these treasure teachings, as a result of being the rebirth of Trison Detsen's daughter, Pema Sal, who died prematurely. And on the basis of the king's request to Padmasambhava to please revive his daughter, Padmasambhava said, I can't change people's karma, but what I can do is empower your daughter, so in the future she will be the holder of the Nyingtik teachings, which he did. He revived Pema Sal and gave her an empowerment that imprinted on her the the teachings of the heart essence. Now, also Padmasambhava gave these teachings to Yeshe Tsogyal, and it said also an assembly of Dakinis at a place called Tidrum, north of Lhasa. So these were the main recipients, really, of Padmasambhava's heart essence teachings, which he again had received from Sri Singha. So when Pema Sal was reborn, she then upheld these teachings of the heart essence. And so these teachings then came to Longchenpa, and we have two sets of teachings, one that is known as the Khandro Nyingtik, the heart essence of the Dakinis from Padmasambhava, and the Bhima Nyingtik, the heart essence of Vimala Mitra. So Longchenpa, he became the holder of these two teachings. So this is what Longchenpa is famous for, and he wrote down what is known as the four sections of the Nyingtik, which are these two lineages and also his own commentaries on these. And that's why Longchenpa is very, very important, really, for the Tibetan Dzogchen tradition. And of course, these teachings were not just practiced and held within the Nyingma tradition, they were also practiced across the other traditions. The traditions of the Kagyu, Sakya, and Gelug also have great practitioners of Longchenpa's heart essence teachings. And also the Burner teaching as such. So we have these heart essence teachings then practiced very widely and very much associated with Longchenpa. Longchenpa was born in 1308. He was born in central Tibet, in a family of yogis. And when he was very young, he studied with several great masters and also had visions of Saraswati and other deities and so forth. And when he was young, he went to study at the great center of Sangpu, where he became very learned. He left this institution at one point and went then and studied with this great Dzogchen master called Rigzen Kumaraja, who incidentally also was the teacher of the third Karmapa, Rangjung Dorje. So the third Karmapa and Longchenpa were Vajra brothers, and the third Karmapa, Rangjung Dorje, was also very, very famous as a great holder of the Dzogchen teaching. So Longchenpa, he studied and apprenticed and underwent quite a lot of hardship with Kumaraja for a number of years. I think it was 6 years. And then he was instructed to go and practice in retreat, which he did near Samye, central Tibet, near the original first Tibetan monastery. Up in the hills behind there, there's a place called Chimpu. And he stayed there and practiced for many years and had many great realizations. And eventually then moved to a place called Gangri Turka, which is closer to Lhasa, up in the hills also, and there's to this day a great nunnery up there. And above there, Longchenpa then stayed and practiced, and also as his experience grew, then he also attracted many students and began to write. And he effortlessly would write, which is why we to this day have some extraordinary teachings that come from Longchenpa. Now, these teachings, they're not seen as the writings of an intellectual. We sometimes think of Longchenpa's writings really as tantras. There's an incident when the great treasure revealer Chogyal Lingpa, he traveled to the copper-colored mountain, and at one point then the assembly chanted some of Longchenpa's verses, and Chogyal Lingpa says, "Oh, it's nice that here in the copper-colored mountain everyone chants the liturgies of Longchenpa." And there was a voice from the sky then that said, "The writings of Longchenpa are not ordinary compositions, they're the resounding of reality, the resounding of the Dharmata." So Longchenpa's his writings are seen as being really ultimately authoritative, just like the Tantras. And Longchenpa's life was, of course, mainly about teaching. At one point, there was some political incidents, so he moved to Bhutan, lived there for some years. He had a family there, and there's still to this day there is a family lineage of Longchenpas in Bhutan. I'm not exactly sure of the details, but he did have a family there, and I think there was a continuation of it. Anyway, his residence was in Bumtang in central Tibet, so we can still go and see this place called Tapaling in Bumtang, where Longchenpa resided. So Longchenpa then returned to Tibet at one point, and he passed away fairly young, in his late 50s, accompanied by a lot of wonderful signs. And it said then that later incarnations include great masters like Pema Lingpa, who was very important in Bhutan. Anyway, just like many other masters, Longchenpa was seen to be a re-embodiment of Vimalamitra, and said to have been somebody who then, like these emanations of Vimalamitra, he completely clarified the view and practice of the Great Perfection. So, to this day then, the teachings of Longchenpa survive, and the masters of the Great Perfection, they're still passing on these teachings that we have from Longchenpa, particularly two strands. We would talk about the 7 treasures, which we would say are the vast way of explanation of the Pandita, very extensive collection of teachings, and then also the methods for the practice, which are then the heart essence teachings themselves, what we call the 4 sections of the Nyingtik. So anyway, this is just very, very briefly on Longchenpa, and I think I'll put something up in the reading material that sort of sums up what I've said here. But you can find the life of Longchenpa in many, many different places. Okay. Okay, there's a question here. It's a little bit unrelated, but it's good to have some of these practical things in place. I'm wondering, when we leave lamps and incense burning, can we turn them off? Because if we're worried about fire. Some people say that turning off the incense and the light might cause some faults. But then again, yeah, since lighting them, we should leave them on until they're naturally completed. Yeah, there's probably those who would say that, but I think in view of the practicality and the way that we think nowadays, because yes, probably in some places we wouldn't worry too much about these things, but I think in the modern context, there's a certain pragmatism that seems to inform the view that it's a good idea to turn the lights, the lamps, the lights, what's burning, right? To turn it off when we leave the room. So I think it's okay to do that. I would say both approaches are valid. I don't think anybody should argue about it. But if you have a Dharma center, then in view of the modern pragmatism, I say, yeah, maybe just turn off the lights. You know, you don't want to have a fire. You know, you try explaining that to the insurance company that it's bad karma to turn off your light. So, and then somebody says, is there a recommended pictorial representation of the mandala that has the Buddha field with white Guru Rinpoche as depicted in the Longchen Yingting Guru Yoga section? Yeah, the one that I've been using here has pretty much is like that. Yeah. Is the Longchen Yingting a Gongte? Well, actually, the Longchen Yingtig is then, we'll look at Jigme Lingpa next time, I guess, and essentially Longchen combined the two, and Jigme Lingpa then, with establishing the Longchen Yingtig, then had these two lineages combined. So actually the Viman Yingtig that came down to Longchenpa is an oral lineage, and the Viman, the Khandro Yingtig from Padmasambhava is a Gongte, is a mind treasure. But then when the teachings come down to Jigme Lingpa, these two combined, which is essentially based on his visions of Longchenpa, then yes, then that is then seen as a mind treasure. So that's strictly speaking, the Longchen Yingtig is a Gongte, a mind treasure. Yeah. Okay. So now this tanka is the tanka that we would use for the we could use this way of representing Padmasambhava is generally according to the Guru Yoga of the of the Longchen Yingting. Yeah. Somebody says, what's the difference between Yingtig and Tuktig? That's pretty much the same. Yeah, they're both means a heart essence. Yeah. Okay, making practice part of one's life, and this is then where the teaching, the practice that we're doing is integrated. Now, there's one thing we want to think and clarify before we go into this, is something that very often comes up in the modern context, which is we in the West tend to think in terms of behavior. We so often think of the teaching, the applicability of the teaching in terms of behavior. We very often think that the way that we deal with our life and our circumstances, the instructions that we should take with us is about how do we behave, how do we handle it in terms of what we do or what we say and so forth. And in the teaching, we don't. That's in the teaching. The Buddhist teaching is to some extent prescriptive in terms of vows and in terms of doing practice, but there's a incredible pragmatism that lies in leaving it open to understanding the individual situation requires individual decisions about how to handle it. But what really matters and the integration of the path lies in how is our mind behaving? What are the attitudes? And this is a big deal, really. We will, of course, the general sense of how do we integrate the teaching? What are the signs of the teachings, and so on an external level? We would say yes. We'd be more flexible. We're more kind. We're more open-minded. We're less aggressive, less ambitious, and again, that needs to be understood in a proper way, and so forth. Sure, but what really is sometimes confusing is that the instructions that we have from the teachings, they're all about how we handle the realities of life, but they're about how we handle the mind. And so very often you sometimes have people saying, "Oh, thank you for the teachings, but can we now have some instructions on how to handle everyday life?" And the comedy in this is that all the teachings are about everyday life. They're about what happens in the mind. So the teachings are not about this is how you should handle, aggressive people, or this is how you should engage with this, or this is how you should work with this situation, and so forth. Because when we're handling the mind, there's a natural intelligence that ensues. And if we're practicing Guru Yoga, it's so much about carrying the presence of the teacher, where then that will inform us how to operate in different situations. Otherwise, the list would be endless of how to handle things. So please keep that in mind. Distinguish between behavior, which is so much about what we ordinarily how we ordinarily think in terms of handling our life and circumstances, and the integration of Dharma, which is more about sustaining this unclouded mind of that is not caught up in the reactive patterns that we ordinarily find ourselves. One of my teachers once said, the experience of blessing is like jeans, like wearing jeans. This was in the 80s, and there was a sense that jeans is something you could wear in all circumstances. And similarly, also when we have this condition of recognizing the presence of the teacher, then we're ready for anything. We can go anywhere. Okay, if we are practicing Dharma to go beyond birth and death, how the Bodhisattva in this context is we come here to realize Buddhahood, to bring all beings to their Buddha nature, since sentient beings are infinite as the sky. Well, the entire problem with samsara is that we limit ourselves, and the Bodhisattva is unlimited. So there's never a sense that, okay, I'm just going to help some beings, or just going to do it for a while. There's no longer any sense of this limitations in terms of time and our own abilities and so forth. So the Bodhisattva vow by nature is that we're no longer caught up in ourselves, and so naturally we will be there for all sentient beings. That's and that, of course, when we're practicing the Dharma, this is something that's beyond birth and death. Birth and death, they're relative phenomena that come and go due to our karmic projections and due to our karmic, the births and deaths that we have, the way they play out is due to karma, but the very nature of samsara is this confused condition where we're always operating with time and place. And so we, in the condition of samsara, we have birth and death. But the very nature of Dharma and enlightenment is going beyond that, seeing beyond that. And that's where we also are, we're no longer limited and hence naturally manifesting for others. Okay. So, in general, Rinpoche says, by the term Dharma practitioner, we mean a person who is able to handle all kinds of circumstances, both good and bad, and who can take even the worst experiences as catalysts to help further progress in his or her practice. The circumstances in which we find ourselves should actually clarify our practice, our experiences, and our realization. And we should be able to understand all situations, both favorable and unfavorable, as teachings on the path. So again, when we're practicing, then everything becomes a reflection of that. We are continually integrating this insight, and the circumstances in life give us opportunity to clarify, how am I doing in terms of having positive circumstances, negative circumstances. There's this intelligence of not being distracted by circumstances and sustaining then the wisdom. And that then enables us to handle whatever circumstances come about. So, of course, we have extraordinary stories, and we have, how do you say, examples by looking at the lives of the masters of the past, how that was done. And this again is where I'm always saying we should never think, when we look at the examples of the masters of the past, that they belong to a different culture. They had to deal with exactly the same material in terms of their psychology, in terms of their reactive patterns and so forth, as we have in the modern culture. Their cultural context would have been different, but that's secondary. They would have had more exposure to examples of the teachings, that's true. But nevertheless, we presently, us who are attending these teachings, we have masters nowadays that embody and illustrate the application of the teaching. Rinpoche goes on to say, the obstacles that can arise from both good and bad circumstances should never deter us or dominate us. So we should never fall under the influence of circumstances. He says we should be like the earth, which supports all living beings, without regard to distinctions of good or bad, favorable and unfavorable. The earth simply abides. And this is the example of the sage. The sage is not numb. The sage is very feeling and has a very open experience, but at the same time also has this accommodating quality of not falling into the self-centered patterns of liking and disliking. So in that sense, the practitioner is like the earth that takes anything. This is the example of the sage. This does not imply that we should become doormats. This does not imply that we are indifferent or numb, but it implies that we are no longer involved in this futile attempt to hold on to what we like and push away what we don't like. This is about accepting life in its raw reality. So this is the quality of the sage, being like the earth. Rinpoche says, when faced with difficult situations, a practitioner should use them as an opportunity to strengthen his or her practice, just as a strong wind, rather than extinguishing a bonfire, intensifies it and causes it to blaze even more brightly. So again, this is where we would say the difficult circumstances the practitioner encounters enhances the practice. Should we encounter unfortunate circumstances, such as bad influences, harsh words, criticism, or even being thrown into prison, we should not think, I have prayed so much to the three jewels, I do not deserve such treatment. This also goes for old Dharma practitioners who says, I have attended so many teachings, I should be given the front row seats, or I should be given a special treatment. I'm a very devoted, serious practitioner. I deserve to attend this teaching or be included, and like that. So this is where the unfortunate or unwanted circumstances continually is an opportunity to practice. Rinpoche says we should understand that all such difficulties arise as a result of having harmed others throughout our past lives, and we should endure such sufferings and hardships thinking, through what has befallen me, may the sufferings of other beings caused by the negative actions they have accumulated in their past lives all be condensed and exhausted in me. This teaching we also have in the Lojong. So whatever suffering that we experience, we simply pray, okay, this is painful. May, through me experiencing this pain, may it exhaust the pain and the causes of suffering that others have. In this way, then, whatever we experience becomes something that we carry with this bodhicitta, with this caring that we think made it make things easier for others. So Rinpoche continues, we should always realize that our trying circumstances are actually a manifestation of the skillful means of Guru Rinpoche, who in this way gives us occasions to purify our negative karma. Thus, we should cheerfully accept any suffering or criticism, thinking, this has been given to me out of the great kindness of my teacher. For example, many Tibetans who suffering severe deprivation and imprisonment throughout the past 25 years in Tibet never wavered in their great devotion to the teacher and sincere enthusiasm for Dharma practice. And this we have. We have quite an abundance, actually, of testimonies from Tibetans and also from our teachers that will tell us about what they went through, what their teachers went through when imprisoned by the Chinese communists when they took over Tibet in the late 50s. And we're no longer talking 25 years ago, we're talking 60 years ago. And of course, this still continues to this day. But the point here is that you'll have many who would say, thanks to these circumstances, their Dharma practice then increased and benefited. You can hear great masters like Gyaltsen Rinpoche, a great Drikung master who's still alive and teaches, who underwent great hardship, and who explains how during his time there was a culture of persons that had no right to practice in these labor camps, but nevertheless secretly they practiced and they never lost it. Tenzin Chudrak, who is His Holiness the Dalai Lama's doctor, physician, tells about his experience. Also discovering the value of the teaching due to these circumstances, and many other masters who underwent great hardships. So Khyentse Rinpoche says, in this case, their experience of extreme suffering had turned their minds towards the Dharma and strengthened their determination to practice it. If we encounter fortunate circumstances, we should never cling to them, but view them as dreams or illusions. If we are prosperous and wealthy, living in a beautiful mansion, we should not think that we are important or great. We should not hoard our wealth or think to acquire even more splendid acquire an even more splendid residence. We should not be concerned with fame and power. So of course, we would say it's a sign that we're good practitioners if we can handle negative circumstances, but it's a sign of even greater practitioners if we can handle positive circumstances. But Basanji, he said, humans can take a lot of suffering but very little happiness. And it's very often that when we have all this happiness, or it's not even happiness, but favorable circumstances, there's then a kind of a sense of entitlement, a sense of complacency that begins to take place. And we become sloppy and lazy. And so we should not be caught up in that. He says, rather, Khyentse Rinpoche continues, rather we should realize that whatever good fortune comes our way is due simply to the kindness of the teacher. It would be due to some good karma, good circumstances, us invoking good energy and so forth, but this ultimately is about us actually having been abiding by the nature of the Dharma. So we should not take this as anything that reflects some sort of personal superiority. This is about our applying the teaching. Having acquired something valuable or having achieved something great, we should never forget that nothing in this world is permanent. So that's the very bottom line in terms of just the circumstances, the fortunate circumstances. They won't last. As it is said in the sutras, what is born will die. What has been gathered will be dispersed. What has been accumulated will be exhausted, and what has been high will be brought low. So we need to remember that. In favorable circumstances, we should wish, may all the prosperity I now enjoy be distributed to all beings. May it be offered to Guru Rinpoche, and may I myself be content with having just enough food and clothing. In fact, so Rinpoche says, to sustain ourselves, in fact, we need only enough clothing to protect us from the elements and only enough food to maintain our lives. We, like the holy beings of the past, should be satisfied with such dwelling places as mountain caves and solitary hermitages. So I can just having met Khyentse Rinpoche, King Khyentse Rinpoche, I can testify how I saw Rinpoche himself living this. Rinpoche was very often offered comfortable circumstances, but in reality he cared for absolutely nothing. I saw him once for several months live in a temple where he had absolutely no privacy at all, and he was perfectly contented. He would be seeing people. He had no luxuries except he had a bed he could lie on, and he had a throne from which he would teach. And then, people would wheel in a porta-john, a portable loo, every once in a while. Then he would have some privacy just with some curtains just around. And oh yeah, no, there wasn't any extra curtains. That's right. We would just leave that little enclosure with some curtains between the pillars. And so forth, so that there was that absolutely, this reflected no need for any luxuries. Rinpoche, of course, also famously did 22 years of retreat, and many of these were actually in mountain caves. And also, if we look at other masters, they might have circumstances like monasteries that look very elaborate, but then again, their own comfort is very often just bare nothing. Their own rooms, like Khyentse Rinpoche's room, was hardly anything in a very small room with just a shrine and a bed. And Rinpoche did not have a big wardrobe, as most people probably know. Anyway, so it's more about the contentment, really. So Rinpoche says all the great sages of the past lived in caves with wild animals as companions, because they had turned from the depth of their being toward the Dharma. They based their practice on the ascetic life of a vagabond who has renounced everything. The mind of such a renunciant the mind of such a renunciant is ever filled with the Dharma. And thought of the Dharma leads him or her to a solitary life in a cave, where their diligence is constantly spurred by the thought of death. We should, as much as possible, adopt this frame of mind as our own. So we often have this quote from the Kadampa masters, where we would say, what is it again? One's mind should rely on the Dharma. The Dharma should rely on the thought of death. The thought of death should bring one to rely on life in a cave, and life in a cave should rely on ending it there, unknown. This is not exactly the right quote, but that's pretty much it. Basically means that we surrender ourselves to the Dharma without wishing any particular credentials whatsoever. In this way, we can prevent even good situations from creating obstacles to our practice. Otherwise, it happens that practitioners of Dharma, having achieved some renown, begin to consider themselves teachers or lamas. Thinking in this way, they begin to feel they deserve delicious food, costly clothes, greater fame, and so on. So sometimes we see persons that seem to be quite keen, just on the basis of having some education or practice in the Dharma, quite keen to have some sort of name. And then once there's the name, then also there's this sense of entitlement and so forth. When this happens, grasping and pride becoming strengthened, and the original motivation for the practice of Dharma is completely lost. At that time, this is a career. Then from being a practitioner, then all of a sudden one is a Dharma teacher, as if this would be a career, or Dharma instructor even. So the initial incentive, which was disgust for the suffering of samsara, repulsion for the confusion that drives samsara, that's lost. That's why in the Kyabje teachings we would say revulsion is the, what is it again, the head of meditation, right? So this we need to be aware of, could happen, and we want to make sure it doesn't happen. So Rinpoche says, this will not do. By viewing favorable circumstances as dreamlike and illusory, we can avoid such pitfalls and fortify our practice. So this is where we want to sustain this non-attachment, just simply seeing if there's good circumstances, just seeing them as illusory. We can view the changing states of our practice in a similar way. If we encounter difficulty in the practice itself, such as dullness, wild thoughts, or poor visualizations, we should use it as an opportunity to cultivate pure perception. This means the perception of our environment and the beings in it, not as ordinary, but as the glorious copper-colored mountain inhabited by Dakas and Dakinis. It means the perception of all appearances as Guru Rinpoche, all sounds as the resonant of his mantra, and all thoughts as the play of his wisdom. So this is if we encounter difficult circumstances. We shouldn't think, oh, now I can't practice because this is happening. It means now this is happening, and this means that we need to strengthen our resolve in our practice and see whatever happens as the display of the teaching of the teacher. And so regard all of this as a challenge for us. Difficult circumstances will drive us to practice. By the nature of suffering, we look what is going to help. We can see the only thing that really will help is the practice of the Dharma, changing our attitude, changing our perception. It won't help to wish that the circumstances were different. And that's why then when difficult circumstances come, it's no good if we say, I can practice, but when this happens, that's really too much. Then it's impossible to practice. It's the other way around. It's when these impossible circumstances happen, then we need to apply the teaching. So that's with difficult circumstances. Rinpoche says if we encounter the good fortune of very clear awareness and good experiences in our practice, we should not think, aha, I have become someone really advanced. I ought to be a teacher. Rather, we should not give much importance to it. We should rest in fresh and vivid awareness of the present moment, having neither aims nor attachment. So when we have that, if we begin to think, oh, I have this experience, I have this credential, I have something, then we're already killing it in the sense that we're objectifying it, solidifying it, turning it into an object of grasping. And as much as we can be attached to ordinary circumstances, the spiritual trap is that we can be trapped by spiritual pride and this infatuation with our own experience. So the remedy here is to continue practice without having any attachment to it, without getting caught up in aims or attachments. In short, Rinpoche says, whatever we attain or acquire in the way of wealth, prosperity, fame, food, clothing, or spiritual experiences should never be allowed to generate clinging or attachment within us. Should these feelings arise, we must sit quietly, expel the stale breath 3 times, thinking that with it, attachment, hatred, and ignorance are expelled. And remember how essenceless and fleeting these ephemeral achievements are. So when these feelings arise, we should deal with them, free them, and if we're not able to deal with them and they sit with us and we begin to get caught up with these, whether it's positive or negative feelings, then one way is to expel the stale breath 3 times, as per the instructions, and think that we're cleared of the stale energy within ourselves. Let's see if there's some questions. There's a few questions. Can you upload the picture of the Buddha fields to the resources? Yes, I can do that. You mentioned not becoming a doormat. Then how would you differentiate that regarding equanimity? Well, doormat is a very ignorant condition. It's basically refusing to relate. So that means I'm just adopting this attitude of acceptance, but the intelligence is sort of lost in that. There's no longer any looking at the circumstances. It's more just being caught up in oneself. It's a very closed-in, a refusal to relate to the world attitude. Equanimity, however, is an acceptance and an interest in the world and what happens. And so this is a very intelligent, aware situation. So equanimity is a highly sensitive and open condition where we're not censoring, we're not involved in the fussy process of this is acceptable, this is not acceptable. So it's a one of great intelligence and compassion that is aware of the circumstances. That's equanimity. Whereas doormat is the exact opposite. That's where we refuse to relate to the world and just sort of not reacting, playing deaf and dumb, and being completely insensitive to the circumstances. We just retreat into an accepting situation. And that's where the resentment builds. Doormats eventually snap and become dangerous. So doormat is in no way equanimity, but it is unfortunately very often what happens when, for example, teachers would when we hear the Dalai Lama teaching compassion, then people say it's very nice to be compassionate to people. That what about when they walk all over us, or if we have teachings on patience? Then people will think, oh, that's just becoming, endlessly accepting. And again, this is where we mistake behavior and the practice of, say, equanimity. Because doormat is really just thinking in terms of, okay, I'm not going to do anything, even though everything is terrible. See, the attitude behind is that everything is terrible. And so the attitude of like and dislike is still there. And so that's where we need equanimity to remedy this essentially passive-aggressive nature of the doormat. So this is an important point, distinguishing these two. How do we deal with feeling like a doormat but not having the energy to skillfully manage situations? This is where we need to practice. And so it's like with martial arts, we might know all the tricks, but unless we actually have a regular practice that enables us to really transform the ground of our being, not just contrive new behavior patterns, but really from the depth actually having this spacious quality of peace. Unless we have that, then the managing situations will inevitably fall into these habitual ways of doing things. And so that's where we then end up being exhausted just from the overwhelm. And that's why at the end of the day, it's so much about us actually having being humbly recognizing our circumstances and the need to practice meditation, and then again integrating this meditation in our everyday life. So the bottom line for both these questions is really to apply the teachings that we're looking at presently. When we talk about going beyond birth and death, are we talking from the absolute? And the bodhisattva practice is the relative. So we come here until all beings are liberated. This is the relative. It is a tricky one. Okay, as long as we have the notions of time and space, of Buddhas and sentient beings, of self and other, then there is the notion of then there is the Bodhisattva vow, which is, you could say, the relative bodhicitta. And that is where we then, yes, we vow to be there for all sentient beings until they're all liberated. So this is the vow, the relative vow of bodhicitta. The absolute vow of bodhicitta, yes, that is where we look at that which is beyond any reference point whatsoever. So there we don't talk about Buddhas and sentient beings. So the absolute bodhicitta is beyond that. But in terms of our situation, we would generally understand that us practicing the cultivation of vipassana and wisdom and so forth, us engaging that which is beyond birth and death, will free us and enable us to act with greater skill on the relative level. So through the accumulation of wisdom, or through the practice of meditation, through the practice of gaining a wider perspective, this also enables us to acquire greater skill in benefiting others. So is equanimity, everything is workable? Yes, because equanimity is looking at phenomena and seeing that they're made up of causes and conditions, and they don't exist solidly in one way or another. When we perceive things as solid and immovable, incurable, etc., then we can't work with them. But this is when we're imputing something on phenomena that they don't have. Phenomena are made up of circumstances. They are made up of causes. And that's where seeing the praticca samutpada, seeing dependent arising, is seeing the conditional workable nature of all phenomena. So the degree to which we have, to the degree to which that we have an equanimity, we see clearer that things are not just, a one-shot deal. They are many different. There are many different things. We can see things from different perspectives. So equanimity is also this absence of aggression that only sees things in terms of our view. It's taking in the aerial perspective, and that's where we find things are workable. Okay. Rinpoche says, in the distant past, Lord Buddha appeared in the supreme land of India and attained perfect enlightenment. In many places there, he turned the wheel of the Dharma, enabling many thousands of arhats to achieve realization. Such realized beings could travel in the sky and display many other miraculous powers. So we have stories like the likes of Moggalliyana and so forth, who could do all these amazing feats and so forth. There was also the arhats, where some could turn half of their body into fire and half into water and so forth. So these, of course, are only external manifestations, but nevertheless, not just in the Buddhist teaching, but all over India, we have many stories, narratives about unusual things that took place as a reflection of spiritual accomplishment. Rinpoche says, today nothing at all is left of these marvels except the mere names of the places where they happened. Later, the Dharma was brought to Tibet, where it quickly took root and spread, producing many great saints, who in turn transmitted many great teachings. Today, all of these great ones have gone to other celestial fields, and there's nothing left of them here on earth. So, both in the case of India and Tibet, we have many great teachers. We have had many great, amazing places where the Dharma flourished, and they are left behind many, many stories of great masters. Yet, on the basis of the lack of merit in this world and the circumstances, then there's very little compared to how it was in the past. So remembering this, Rinpoche continues, we must realize that in whatever we might obtain or achieve, there is neither substance nor essence. So we should not be attached to any form of the teaching as something that exists with it permanent, either in ourselves or around us. We should never crave either worldly things or dharmic accomplishments, and should remain completely free from clinging. So of course we should have direction in terms of what we're doing with our Dharma practice, but in terms of something that we should hold on to, that we want to hold on to, and it can even be also holding on to, like the Tibetans themselves experience, the Dharmic institutions. Like what Rinpoche is talking about here is the destruction of the Dharma as it happened in India, as it happened in Tibet. And that's where we need to be free of any kind of attachment, either to our own spiritual achievement and also to the institutions or the frameworks or structures of the teaching. From time to time we may, in reality in our dreams, encounter violent influences or negative forces coming from wild spirits and troublemakers. If these things happen, we should never, even in dreams, think to annihilate such harmful spirits. So we should not fall into this thing that the negativity is out there. There's this spirit or this circumstances, that they're baddies out there. Rinpoche says we should instead reflect that all these creators of obstacles have in fact been our own kind parents in our past lives. So if we're thinking of outer people, though at one time our father and mother who nurtured and cared for us, our father and mother who nurtured and cared for us, they are now intent on causing us injury and harm. The reason for this must be sought and found in negative actions performed in our own past lives. We should further understand that if some negative forces harm us, it is because they themselves are acting under the poisonous influence of their own negative karma. And in so doing, they're creating the causes of future suffering for themselves. Thinking this, we should generate great compassion for them. Now, this again is where the doormat discussion is relevant, because we might think, oh, these are negative persons out there. There really must be, something must be done about them. I can't just be passive looking onto this. We're not really talking about that again. See, this is where behavior comes into it. Of course, we might need to deal with them. But what Rinpoche is saying here is generating compassion. He's not saying that we shouldn't stop things. It doesn't mean that we should become passive. It doesn't mean that we should, if a burglar walks into our house, or if somebody is doing something really negative, that we should be impassive and just look on and say, oh yeah, that's terribly nice, just walk off with, you know, my TV and my with everything. That's not the point. The point is, what happens is that we get upset, we get angry, and also even if we do have to stop the burglar, we have to do so, we have to be cool. If we're hot-headed and wound up and so forth, we won't be able to deal with any circumstances. For us to deal skillfully, and skillfully can be many different things. It can sometimes be being assertive and so forth. But we're never going to be able to be effectively assertive, effectively skillful, if we're caught up with anger and aggression, fear, and so forth. And that's where the compassion is so important. The moment that we have compassion in dealing with difficult people or circumstances, we're much more effective. We see much more what is happening in the situation. We will achieve our objective far more effectively if we have compassion. And so this confused condition that brings aggression and fear and alienation that takes place within conflicts, that is not going to help us. So that's where understanding the overall, having the aerial perspective that then brings about compassion, enables us to be far more effective. Rinpoche continues, if they seem bent on harming us, we should interpret it as an opportunity to purify our own obscurations. So maybe sometimes we just can't do anything, and then we're just going to have to accept all illnesses and hindrances, sicknesses of the body and sufferings of the mind, can be used as the path if we simply see them as being the display of the wisdom of our Guru. So that's where it's not going to help for us sometimes to, if there's a choiceless situation, to resent what's happening. We will have to accept this, and we should see this as something that purifies us and something that enables us to handle circumstances in a greater way. Rinpoche says, in this way we can purify our negative karma as well as the sufferings resulting from it. If we fall into the habitual way of reacting, then we're just going to perpetuate negative karma. Whereas if we can take these circumstances and work constructively with it without falling into the habitual patterns, we are then breaking away from the ordinary rut of our karmic wiring, and that's where we can purify our karma. If we maintain this kind of attitude, such negative forces will not be able to create any real obstacles. But if we instead perceive them as enemies, thinking that we must destroy them, we will only make matters worse. So regardless of what happens to us in terms of negative circumstances, whether it's something that's choiceless or whether it's something that we can work with, to have that perception of seeing the other as enemy and seeing circumstances as something we resent, it will only make things worse. Okay. Let's see if there's some questions. So all of this sounds like the key Mahayana principles. How does Guru Yoga in everyday life add power to this? The general Mahayana works with freeing the mind from its ordinary confusion, whereas the Guru Yoga, of course, does the same. These is the same Mahayana principles apply, but there's a particular skill of integrating awareness of the teacher, which is then the skill that's based on our devotion to the teacher, the presence of the teacher, this experience of openness, faith, devotion that brings about this experience of blessing. That is what connects us with co-emergent wisdom, that enables us to skillfully then engage this quality of wisdom in our ordinary life. So it's the skill of blessing, basically, that enables us to integrate in a far greater way the general Mahayana principles. Yeah? Okay, went a little bit over time. So is it all about seeing things as a manifestation of the Guru? Well, definitely, that's the method. But we want to appreciate that the logic that lies in seeing all things as a manifestation of the Guru is that the foundation of this approach, because here we're just talking about the method, seeing all manifestations of the teacher. This is what we're being told. But again, this could also just be behavior, right? It's based on the devotion to the teacher that enables us to begin to appreciate the presence of the teacher's wisdom within ourselves. And that's where the recognition that phenomena as a reflection of our mind then is a reflection of the teacher. So yes, it's about seeing things as the manifestation of the Guru, but particularly it's about softening the mind from within and having this devoted openness to the teacher that enables the teacher's wisdom to soak our being, to soak our attitude, to soak our entire subjective experience of who we are. And that's where then we begin to have this playful experience of the world as the presence of the teacher. So it is very much tied up with essentially devotion that allows for this situation of blessing. And that's where we then have a very, very open relationship to the phenomenal world around us. Okay. So, yeah, some people have asked how how many more times will be on this text. I'm not quite sure, to be honest. I was thinking we could finish this next time, but I don't think so. So maybe it'll be a few more times. Yeah, maybe two, maybe even three more times. Let's see. Anyway, I'll keep everyone in the loop. Or rather, you should be receiving these reminders, right, when you've signed up. Yeah. So presently, yes. Okay, what I've done presently is I've accommodating Christmas and New Year. I think the next time we'll meet will be the 8th of January. Yeah. And somebody was asking, what will we, so we'll do 8th of January, might extend it to also do the 15th, let's see. And also, what will I be doing next? After this, I'll be doing a text. It's a new text. It's not meditation in action. It's one called mindfulness in action. And this is a work by Chögyam Trungpa. Rather, it's actually Carolyn Rose Gimian who collected a lot of Trungpa Rinpoche's instructions on meditation. But it's very, very helpful for, so whether we're practicing, whatever we're practicing, this is extremely helpful. All of us are practitioners of meditation one way or another. But without proper grounding in meditation, in mindfulness, and so forth, then so often we're lost in all the method. So to have the ground of meditation is essential. So we'll do that. We'll go through that study following this one here. Okay. Okay. Anyway, Wednesdays will continue. Yeah. So just a break until the 8th of January, but after that we'll continue. Of course, there's also Khyentse Rinpoche who will be teaching here in Australia, and there might be some, let's see, I'm trying to keep some continuity, but let's see how we go. What is it again? The 8th, then there's the 15th, should be possible. 22nd, let's see if that's possible. I'll try. I think Rinpoche might be teaching down in Canberra at that point. Do you know if Khyentse Rinpoche will be attending the transmissions of Khyentse Wangpo in India next month? I don't think so. I think he might be here in Australia, actually. But wonderful if you can go. Yeah, Ravja Rinpoche is giving the reading transmissions for the works of Jaren Khyentse Wangpo. But I think Khyentse Rinpoche might have received these already. But anyway, wonderful to go. Okay, thank you. Through this virtue, may all beings throughout existence awaken together without a single being left behind. The pure realm of the luminous essence, the ground of the great perfection, may they remain inseparable from the kayas and wisdoms. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together.